Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share truck driver horror stories. First story. Truck driver encounters unexplainable horror on remote night road. It was a night like any other on the desolate highways that crisscrossed through the heart of nowhere. My name's Jake, and I'm a truck driver, been hauling cargo through the lonesome roads for over a decade. The kind of life that keeps you company with the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. That night, I found myself on a particularly eerie stretch of road, swallowed by an impenetrable fog. The kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud, concealing the world beyond. The only companions were the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist and the rhythmic beat of raindrops on the roof of my rig. I'd heard rumors on the CB radio about this stretch, a place where truckers whispered of abandoned cars, tales of drivers gone missing without a trace. It was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned drivers, but I'd always scoffed at such stories. That is until that night. As I maneuvered through the winding road, the fog became denser, almost palpable. Visibility dropped to a few feet ahead, and the low hum of the engine seemed swallowed by an oppressive silence. The glow of my headlights refracted off the mist, casting eerie shadows that danced like wraiths in the night. It was then that I saw him, a silhouette on the side of the road. A man, or so it seemed, standing motionless in the fog. My instincts told me to keep going, but the human in me wanted to lend a helping hand. I eased off the gas, and the truck rolled to a stop beside him. He was oddly pale, and the fog clung to his form like a ghostly cloak. But what sent a shiver down my spine were his eyes, big, round, and as black as the void itself. His mouth, a gaping maw, stretched wide in a manner that defied the laws of anatomy. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. The man-creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, staring into the fog. With a lump in my throat, I decided to get going. But as I revved up the engine, I glanced back at him. That's when I saw it. The twisted, grotesque smile that curled on his featureless face. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, leaving the fog-draped figure behind. As I drove away, I grabbed the radio mic to share my unsettling encounter with fellow truckers. But to my dismay, the once buzzing airwaves were silent. No static, no voices. Just an unsettling void that mirrored the fog outside. The road seemed endless, and I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in protest. I needed distance from that creature, needed the safety of the city lights. But as the miles blurred together, the fog persisted, unyielding. I drove way over 100 miles and was sure that creature was far away, and I will never met it again. In the distance, a lonely parking lot emerged, and I decided it was time to pull over. The weariness and fear clawed at me, and I desperately needed a moment to collect myself. I shut off the engine, closed the curtains, and tried to shake off the encounter as mere imagination. Little did I know that the night had only just begun, and the horrors lurking in the fog were far from done with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and nestled into my bunk, hoping that the haunting image of that pale figure with the unnaturally large eyes and twisted smile would fade away with the night. But sleep remained elusive. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, a sense of impending doom washed over me, jolting me awake. A shiver ran down my spine as I fumbled to open the curtains. The parking lot was bathed in an eerie glow from the flickering overhead lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fog. That's when I saw them again, 3 of those nightmarish creatures. They stood like sentinels, their dark eyes fixed on the truck. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to turn on the cabin lights, revealing their ghastly features in all their horrifying glory. Their mouths, wide open, emitted guttural growls that reverberated through the metal walls of the truck. The air in the cabin grew thick with an otherworldly presence, a malevolence that seeped through every pore of my being. I reached for the ignition, praying that the truck would roar to life and carry me far away from this nightmare. But nothing happened. The engine remained silent, as if in protest against the encroaching terror. The creatures, sensing my vulnerability, began to advance. Their movements were unsettlingly smooth, almost as if they were gliding across the asphalt. The growls intensified, echoing through the desolate parking lot. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as desperation set in. My hands trembled as I repeatedly turned the key, willing the engine to respond. The growls escalated into a cacophony, and the creatures closed in, their features contorted in a grotesque display of hunger. Just as the creatures were about to reach the truck, a surge of relief washed over me as the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into drive, the truck jolting forward, leaving the creatures behind in the rearview mirror. As the truck sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were not bound by the laws of the physical world. Their terrifying growls echoed in the distance, even as the city lights finally emerged on the horizon. I dared a glance back, and to my horror, I saw the creatures running after the truck with unnatural speed, far beyond anything human. It was as if the shadows themselves were chasing me. As I drove into the welcoming glow of city lights, the creatures abruptly halted. Their twisted forms lingered at the edge of the urban sprawl, their growls fading into the night. Relief mingled with a lingering dread as I realized they had a boundary, a limit to their reach. I parked the truck in a well-lit area, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio mic once more, hoping to connect with someone, anyone. But the static-filled airwaves remained stubbornly silent. The city lights seemed to push back the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were still out there, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. The night was far from over, and the road ahead held more horrors than I could fathom. I spent the restless hours of the night parked in that well-lit haven, the city lights warding off the encroaching darkness. But no matter how brightly the urban landscape glowed, the images of those nightmarish creatures lingered in the recesses of my mind, their growls echoing like a sinister melody. As dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of fog, with a newfound paranoia. The city lights gradually faded in the rearview mirror as the road stretched into another desolate expanse. My radio crackled to life, the sudden sound making me jump. It was a voice of fellow trucker. "Hey, you there? You okay?" The voice sounded concerned, and I eagerly responded, recounting the horrors of the night, the fog-shrouded figures, the broken radio, and the unrelenting pursuit. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke, heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're not alone. We've all heard those stories, the abandoned cars, the creatures in the fog. But we always thought they were just stories." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had faced those monstrous entities. The radio buzzed with hushed conversations among truckers, each sharing their own encounters with the supernatural on this stretch of road. The stories varied, but a common thread emerged. Those creatures, with their haunting eyes and twisted smiles, were a malevolent force that seemed drawn to the lonely roads in the dead of night. No one knew their origin or their purpose, but they left a trail of fear in their wake. As I continued my journey, the unease persisted. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the fog clung to the edges of the highway like a malevolent specter. I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were watching, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The radio chatter intensified, with truckers exchanging advice on how to avoid the creatures, sharing tales of those who had disappeared without a trace. The fear was palpable, a shared experience that bound us together in the face of the unknown. With each passing mile, the city lights became a distant memory. The road ahead was swallowed by an impenetrable fog, and the radio once again fell silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. As I approached the familiar stretch where I first encountered the creatures, a sense of dread settled over me. The fog thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Then, a haunting realization struck me. This road was a loop, an unending circuit that brought travelers back to the heart of the supernatural. The city lights, the camaraderie on the radio, all illusions meant to deceive. The creatures weren't bound by distance. They were bound by time, forever haunting those who dared traverse this cursed stretch. A guttural growl echoed through the fog, and the twisted figures emerged once again. Their black eyes bore into my soul, their gaping mouths emitting an otherworldly wail. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest, but the truck seemed tethered to the nightmarish loop. As the creatures closed in, the fog swallowed everything, and the road became an unending void. The last thing I saw were those eyes, an abyss that seemed to consume all light. The radio crackled to life one final time, a chorus of terrified voices screaming a warning. But it was too late. The creatures closed in, and the world descended into darkness. And so, the haunted highway claimed another victim, lost to the eternal night and the malevolent creatures that lurked within the fog. The loop continued, a never-ending cycle of horror, trapping the unwary in an unending nightmare. The road stretched on, shrouded in fog, a haunted path that few dared to traverse, and even fewer escaped. Second story. Stay in your vehicle. Back in April of 2013, I went through something that I haven't been able to talk about. I was paid a significant amount of money to stay quiet, in return for signing a 10-year agreement to shut the hell up. Now that the time is up, I've considered my options. I could just let this go and never speak of it again. I won't gain anything from speaking out, and I got a lot to lose. But then again, this is just an anonymous post online. Words have less meaning that way. West Virginia. It was hotter than usual, without a whiff of wind. I was coming home from a visit to my aunt. She'd broken her leg and couldn't leave her house. I was making my way back home, taking the I-64 out of Lewisburg. It started with the radio. It was playing that one Macklemore song I'd heard 100 times over. The sound was cutting in and out in a quick staccato, then disappeared completely. I could hear cars honking up front as a line began to form. There was a sway in the trees, as if greater and greater pressure was being put on them. I could hear wind rushing against the left side of the car, forcing me to pull the other way to compensate. I closed the sunroof as a dust cloud blew past, staining the windshield. Then a rumble. It sounded like thunder, but from the ground, like a groaning bellow, growing louder and clearer by the second. As it reached its peak, I could see trees toppling over. A small Kia got pushed off balance and swerved off the road. As the sound died down, the road devolved into chaos. Some were desperately changing lanes, others were stepping on the brakes. I got my door scraped as the car behind me sped past. The radio was playing an automated message. A local emergency alert, referred to as a geological event. We were asked to turn off all air conditioning, slow down, and divert to the nearest exit. It repeated in a monotone voice. Geological event. No air conditioning. Slow down. Divert to nearest exit. Minutes passed. There was a line forming further down the road. Police officers blocking the lanes in all directions, leaving a highway exit as the only option. Some folks were trying to push past the barricades but were forced back at gunpoint. I could see officers wearing gas masks and riot shields. We were waved in. I followed the exit and got directed to the right. There was an open field that was used as a sort of impromptu parking lot. Cars were being waved in and parked in a way that boxed us in, leaving no room for us to open our doors in either direction unless we got parked at the edge. For lines of cars with about 10 to 15 vehicles per line, surplus vehicles were directed further down the road. The place was packed. I got stuck in the second row, about 6 cars in. Pretty much everyone around me were on their phones. I didn't have anyone to call, but there seemed to be an issue getting a signal through. The radio was still repeating the emergency message. Voices were getting louder. A man 2 cars to my left leaned out of a gap in the door, screaming at the officers to answer his question. They responded immediately with a warning shot straight into the air. "Stay in your vehicle," they screamed. "Lock your doors. I'm not telling you again." A couple of folks were filming, but there seemed to be trouble uploading. We were losing bandwidth. It didn't take long until phone signals were completely blocked. I think a video or 2 of that officer firing into the air made it online. They were patrolling back and forth. We were told to stay in our vehicles. Windows up, doors closed and locked. Engines off. I could hear people talking in the other cars. Someone said there'd been a natural gas leak from the geological event, and that combustible engines could spark an explosion. Others were talking about a terrorist attack. There were no answers, and the officers weren't eager to talk. After about an hour, things were getting ugly. People were hungry, thirsty, and restless. One officer stepped up on the front cars, handing out water bottles, crackers, and processed cheese slices. He had to step from one car to another, denting the hoods with his steel-tipped shoes. They were also handing out thick black plastic hygiene bags for people who needed to relieve themselves. Use them, seal them, drop them out the door, then lock up and wait. I crawled into the back seat, pulled down my cap, and tried to relax. I've been playing some games on my phone, but the battery was running low. I wanted to save some, so I settled for having a nap instead. The sweat was stinging my eyes, not because of how warm it was, but because of how nervous I was. No matter what I did, I felt trapped and the car felt smaller and smaller. I couldn't get out if I wanted to, and it physically hurt me to think about how little control I had. Is that what claustrophobia feels like? A couple of officers were discussing something by the front line. One of them had a white cotton glove on, which he used to wipe off the hood of one of the front cars. The glove was taken off and put into a bag, which in turn was sealed with a hot air gun. I was getting the impression that our cars had been covered in something. I wasn't the only one considering it. There were 2 college kids in the car to my left and they were discussing it too. Anthrax, one of them said. Gotta be. Nah, gold dust, the other chuckled. They don't want to share. You know what? The first groaned. I honest to God hope you're right. You're not. But I hope you are. Fuck you. I joined in the conversation shortly after. I offered another explanation. Something combustible. Something that might blow up if we started our cars. They were willing to consider this. The car behind me couldn't hear us, but the driver held up a notebook with the text. If we do know what it's gotta be aliens. I couldn't tell if they were serious, but they weren't laughing about it. A man in his 50s and what looked like his daughter. There were a couple of other folks in the other cars. A man in a black shirt, sort of looked like a preacher without a collar. Two middle-aged women with a kid in the back seat. A fat man blaring Johnny Cash from his stereo. A couple with a teenage son who couldn't stop drumming on the windows. We'd been stuck for about maybe 2.5 hours when a truck rolled in. One of those with a large water tank. It was unmarked, looked civilian. As it rolled in, they were calling out on the megaphone. We'll be hosing your vehicles down, they said. Keep everything locked and closed. Then we'll be covering your vehicle with protective plastic while we wait for it to dry. After that, we'll start letting you go in an orderly manner. I repeat, most of us were relieved. It was only a matter of time now. It was getting dark. They were getting up on the cars, hosing them down thoroughly. It smelled of chlorine, so maybe they'd mix something into the water. As they came to my car, they stepped up on it and double-checked the sunroof, making sure it was locked and secured. They sprayed the car down, bathing it in chemical stink, the kind that gets stuck to the back of your throat. It took a long time for them to finish, at least an hour or two. After that, they were rolling out a kind of plastic cover at the short side of the lot, the kind you use to protect pools or rain covers for football fields. They used 2 squad cars to slowly drape the thing over the entire lot, securing the edges with large rocks. Please stay calm, they called out as the plastic crawled over us. I know this is uncomfortable, but this is for your own safety. Once the cleaning is done, you will be free to go. Stay inside your vehicle at all times. I repeat, I did as I was told. I stayed inside, and I watched that plastic cover sweep over me. It felt like getting buried alive. All lights went out, leaving me in complete darkness, accompanied only by the vague, disembodied voices of the others. The college kids were talking about where they were going to go after this. Someone was honking, not sure if it was to show support or discontent. Someone else was cheering. I took my last swig of water, washing down my final plain cracker. I got back in the driver's seat. I could hear as they finished moving the plastic cover and parking their squad vehicles. I waited patiently, figuring it'd be maybe another hour or so. They hadn't really given us a timeline, but I could breathe a little easier. Sort of. I was going back and forth between feeling empowered with my hands on the wheel and feeling like I was stuck in a metal coffin. It was so dark, and everything smelt of plastic and chemicals, like a car wash stuck in time. As the excitement died down, I paid more attention to the background sounds. I tried to filter out the various discussions from the nearby cars, and somewhere in the distance, I heard raised voices. It wasn't coming from the cars, but the officers. Whatever they were talking about, it was a heated discussion. An hour came and went, and people were getting impatient. More cars were honking. Others were yelling, demanding answers. I couldn't get my leg to stop shaking. The more I thought about getting out of there, the smaller the car felt. I was hyper-focusing on things I couldn't control. I was a little thirsty, and I was out of water. I needed to use the bathroom. I wanted to stretch my legs and go for a walk. I wanted to breathe fresh air and get that awful chemical taste out of my mouth. I heard cars starting, accelerating. The truck was moving somewhere off to the side. "We need you to stay in your vehicle," a voice screamed over the megaphone. "Do not leave. For any reason. Stay in your vehicle." Cars speeding off. Not many, but a couple. Then quiet. The officers left us there. Everyone was quiet. A couple of folks had opened up their phones, using them as flashlights to look from car to car. Looking out at the sea of vehicles, all of us trapped under that dark cover. I could see a handful of lights cut off by sharp silhouettes. I couldn't make out who was who in the dark. It was all just people. Anonymous. I heard a gas somewhere in the back. There was a metallic clunk, like when the officers climbed atop our cars to get us our water. There was a careful cheer as some folks figured they were taking off the plastic cover. But that wasn't it. Instead, there were more footsteps. The cheers slowly died down as more and more footsteps pattered across our cars. I stopped counting after a dozen. The silhouettes in the other cars were still. We all held our breaths, waiting for an answer to show itself. What the hell was going on? What was that sound? Somewhere off to my right, I heard a voice. "Who's up there?" It sounded like an older man. I'd seen a pickup truck that way earlier. Almost as a response, the footsteps stopped. There was a faint clicking sound like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. Click, click. And from further away, a click in response. From somewhere to my left, another couple clicks. Then a cascade of clicks. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. There was an awful metallic noise coming from my right. Then, breaking glass. A scream, cut short, followed by several irregular taps of the car horn. One of the silhouettes in the distance turned into a blur as something passed through the windshield, cutting through the plastic cover. Somewhere in the front row, the roof of a car was cut wide open. Someone was pulled up out of their seat. 2 cars back from where I was, there was more glass breaking. It sounded like a wild animal got in. I could see a weak hint of red spattered against the passenger side windows. I wasn't getting any air. I could feel my heart beating through my chest as my arms started shaking. My hands were cramped around the steering wheel, and I felt sweat dripping down my shoulders. I couldn't control it. I didn't even see what was going on, but these sounds, these screams, they awakened something primal. This was danger. A threat. My body knew long before I did. The college kids in the other car were ducking down. One of them waved a hand at me, as if telling me to get down. I nodded. I scrambled into the back seat. I couldn't see where I was putting my hands or my feet. Everything is different in the dark. As I tumbled my way over, my foot accidentally tapped the car horn. It was a quick tap, a fraction of a second. But to me, it was the loudest sound in the world. I was lying on my stomach in the back seat, and within seconds, something heavy climbed onto the hood of my car. I could feel the car buckling. It was much heavier than the man who'd passed out water bottles. I held my hands in front of my mouth to stop the panting, but I just ended up snorting up sweat instead. My nose stung as I bit my tongue, listening to every metallic groan as whatever was outside moved and shifted. Click, click, and from behind my car, a click in response. There were no lights being held up anymore. Everyone was cowering, going quiet. I pushed myself up against the door behind the driver's seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear the frame of the car complain as something slowly moved. When it came to my sunroof, there was a slight crack that made it stop. Another crack. I silently shook my head, as if trying to ask the car to stop. That thing was going to break. And it did. My legs were showered with glass as a big blob of plastic cover dipped into my car. Something big came tumbling into the front seat, still covered in protective plastic. It twitched and spun around, its clicking turning from a careful question-like noise to a never-ending barrage. It was calling for help, alerting others, and it was cutting its way through the plastic. There were footsteps coming from every direction, some of them leaping from car to car, some of them leaping far enough to skip a car as they hurried. I was going to be swarmed within seconds. I fumbled with my hands, accidentally cutting my thumb on the broken glass. I managed to open the passenger side door, but even at its widest, and even when pressing into the college kid's car, it wasn't enough room to get out. Still, I had to try. I pressed myself into the gap and exhaled as much as I could, flattening my chest. While the thing thrashed around inside my car, I could feel my vision going faint. Black spots popped up at the edge of my vision. My arms were going weak, and yet by some miracle, I made it through. As my face hit the gravel of the makeshift parking lot, I felt the burn of residual chemicals. I swallowed my instinct to run, instead staying on my stomach, forcing myself to crawl under my car. There were more of them, some climbing on, some off. My chest was pressed to the ground as the weight shifted. I heard breaking glass from the windshield and tearing fabric. Something was stuck up there, and it was furious, like a trapped animal. I could hear the college kids mumbling to one another, trying to stay calm. One assuring the other that all they had to do was stay low, stay quiet, and wait. Then something slammed into the passenger side door, the one I'd crawled out of. The door was pressed up against the neighboring car, then fell haphazardly to the ground, completely off the hinges. An ink-black, bird-like foot touched the ground right next to me. I looked it up since. There were 3 toes forward, 1 toe backward, all clawed, anisodactyl feet, similar to that of many birds of prey, except larger than a human foot and with smooth, oil-slick skin. It must have been heavy, at least 400 pounds. If the clicking noise came from its mouth, I can approximate that it was somewhere around 6 feet 7 inches to 6 feet 9 inches. Or taller. It could have been hunched over. How it managed to walk in the gap between the vehicles is beyond me, but I suspect it was very thin. It daintily walked from my car to the others, as if scanning for something. I could barely see anything in the dark, but this thing seemed to navigate it perfectly. It didn't bump into anything. There was a tap on the glass of the car behind me, to my right, and someone got startled. A short scream, and the hunt was on. This time was different. It must have caused some kind of chain reaction, as all of a sudden the plastic cover was getting torn up left and right. People were clawing their way out of their cars. I heard someone kicking against their windshield. Another was trying to open their door. I could hear it slamming against the side of the car next to them. And off in the distance, there was gunfire. Just a couple of shots. The college kids in the car next to me slammed their doors open and followed my lead. They rolled onto the ground and under their car. There was a little more light coming in as the cover had been torn above. Their faces were red from tears, and one of them was desperately trying to call for help on his phone. The other grabbed the phone out of his hand. A short scuffle ensued, ending with them putting on a ringtone and sliding the thing as far to the left as they could. Whatever car that phone landed under was demolished. Every window broken. Every passenger gone. I could hear the grinding as a seat was ripped in two and thrown away. In a matter of seconds, an entire vehicle was torn to pieces as a dozen of those things swarmed it. "Shut up," one of the college kids repeated. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." Something reached under my car. It scraped against the sole of my shoe, tearing a hole all the way to my big toe. I hurried forward, scurrying like a lizard. The college kids noticed and followed suit. I don't think they thought about it too much. It was just movement, and they went for it. I made it 2 cars down before I got stuck. There was something dark in the way, and I couldn't get around it without exposing myself. I couldn't see what it was, but it didn't take long for me to figure it out. There was a meaty crunch, as if someone was biting chunks out of a piece of meat. It was struggling to get through the fabric of their clothes, making a snapping noise as threads gave way. A pool of blood rolled under the car, staining the tip of my fingers. It was still warm. One of those things were eating a victim. I hunkered down, trying to remember to breathe. And I stayed there, waiting for a chance. Any chance. I must have stayed there for at least an hour, hearing every bite, every crack of bone and snap of sinew. Satisfied clicking noises. As it finished its meal, it wandered off, dragging the remains along. They were moving forward. Something heavy walked over the car I was hiding under, dragging a body along. Slowly, the footsteps disappeared. It was quiet again, and in that quiet I found my footing. I made my way to the edge of the plastic cover. I listened one final time, pushed one of the weights away, and slipped through. They were gone, and I was out. I could feel my chest growing lighter, allowing me to breathe. I wanted to cry from relief. A breeze was picking up, drying the sweat on my brow and carrying the smell of grass. Stepping back, I turned towards the sea of cars to see how bad the damage was. And then I saw one. It was a bit off to the side, perching on top of an old Honda. At a glance, it looked like a tall person, covered in a slick black ink. But looking closer, you could see the strange bird-like feet, the pointed nails, the long row of shark-like teeth on a mouth that was far too wide. I froze. The thing rose to its full length, easily over 7 feet tall. It looked ready to pounce on me. I had nothing to defend myself with. I couldn't make any sudden moves. I wouldn't even be halfway under the car before that thing would be over me. 100 thoughts raced through my mind, but there was nothing I could do. I was out of options. But the thing just looked at me. It raised a slice of raw meat. Blood dripped onto the plastic cover. It looked at me curiously, taking a bite. Then, as if nothing had happened, it wandered off, satiated. I was left there, shaking like a dry leaf. And with the last of those things gone, all that was left was the panic. It didn't take long for the officers to return. The plastic cover was removed, but we couldn't go home. Not after this. Some folks signed a waiver and were let go immediately. They weren't allowed to talk about what they'd seen, and in return, they'd get a hefty sum of insurance money. Others demanded answers and were taken into custody for obstruction of justice. A few others still were too panicked to make any kind of sense and had to be checked out by medical personnel. A total of 14 people died. It was described by a combination of causes: a traffic pileup, carbon monoxide poisoning, animal attack. I think there was something about an escaped convict too. Excuses all over the place, and the times were all wrong, spread out through a couple of days to more smoothly blend into accident statistics. And if you wanted to go home and get your insurance money, you had to sign a non-disclosure. I did too. I know the college kids did as well. Goddamn miracle they made it out, but I saw them. 34 cars had to be towed. 18 people wounded, 6 seriously so. For people lost at least one limb. One guy had an arm ripped off halfway up his collarbone. I don't know how he survived. Most people never saw those things up close. They just remember the screams and the breaking glass. Sometimes at night, that's all I hear too. Closing my eyes reminds me of lying under those cars, feeling the pressure as the weight shifted. I still get trouble breathing. I think a part of me is still stuck there. It stayed in my vehicle. Third story. I was a cross-country truck driver. Believe the myth. On a dark desert highway. Wait, that sounds like that old Eagles song. Let me rephrase that. While driving my rig through the desert late at night, try to get back to the yard. There, that's better. Anyway, That's what we call the place where all the tractor trailers are kept, the yard. I saw something that terrified me deep into the belly of my soul. I always thought it was a myth, a legend, something that truckers told themselves to keep themselves awake. But I was wrong. You see, was a cross-country truck driver for the Remington Trucking Company, based out of a very popular city in California. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. So, why not? Right? I mean, I had everything I needed in my sleeper cab: a bed, a microwave, a mini fridge, a portable DVD player, and a coffee pot. I could wash clothes, get a shower, and get some real food at a truck stop, and there were always lot lizards hanging around for any other needs, so to speak. Don't judge. Besides, cross-country truck drivers make a lot of money. Anyway, you don't care about that. You see, I grew up in Camp Springs, Maryland, and every time my parents and I would go visit my aunt and uncle and their family in New Jersey, my father would always take exit 7A on the Jersey Turnpike. You know, the truck route. He would ride that thing all the way down to exit 15, where it ends and merges back into the turnpike itself. He claimed it was faster. That's how I became infatuated with 18-wheelers. It scared the crap out of my mom sometimes, but she'd just close her eyes and try to sleep through it. I, on the other hand, loved it. Anyway, when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be a truck driver. So, I saved some money from my cashier job at Billy's Burger Barn and enrolled at a local truck driving school. I completed the 6-week course and got my CDL. The school helped me find a job at the Remington Trucking Company. It was all the way across the country, but it was a job, and I've been here ever since. Anyway, I packed my stuff, said bye to my parents, got in my car, and headed for sunny California. I worked here for a couple years, drove their trucks, slept in the cab when I was on the road, slept in the shop when I was not, saved some money, and eventually bought my own rig, a used neon green Kenworth W900. I love that rig. Well, that's enough about me. Let me tell you what happened. Now, what I'm about to tell you is something that I have never told anyone before, well, except my therapist. I was heading home after delivering a load of tables, chairs, and sitting booze to a bar in Florida. Some guy named John was remodeling the place. Anyway, I got on Route 66 in Albuquerque and began my final stretch home. It was about 2:30 in the morning. It was a beautiful night out that night. The full moon shining down on the road, not another vehicle in sight, just me and the white lines. I rolled the windows down, letting in the cool night desert air. I turn on the radio and tune it to Coyote 102.5 classic rock. They were actually playing some decent songs that night. I drove down the road, rocking out, enjoying the trip for about an hour and a half. The radio station then began to fade, so I just turned it off. I kept the windows down and just rolled on. With only sound was the engine humming and the wheels whining on the road, and nothing to look at but the white lines. Now, I'm not sure if you know about what's called white line fever. If you do, then great. If you don't, then let me explain. It's basically highway hypnosis. It can happen to anyone, especially when you're driving at night. That's when the lines on the road going by so quickly in a flashing pattern hypnotize you, so you have no recollection of driving or anything that happened while you were in that altered state. No, I'm serious. Look it up. Anyway, I caught the fever. The last thing I remember was turning off the radio, and suddenly I was sitting at a truck stop about 100 miles away from where I last remembered being. I blinked my eyes and shook my head. I need coffee, I told myself. I rolled the windows up, shut off the truck, and went inside. I got the largest cup of coffee they had, added cream and sugar, just how I like it, paid for it, and then went back out to my truck. I got in the truck, took a drink of the coffee, put the cup in the holder, put my seatbelt on, company rules and all, started the truck, wiped my eyes, put the truck in gear, and rolled out. I got back on the road and continued driving, drinking as much coffee as I possibly could to try and stay awake. Now, as we all know, coffee is full of caffeine, which helps keep us awake. But did you know that too much caffeine will cause it to counteract itself and have the total opposite effect? Well, after about 10 minutes of pounding back that coffee, my eyes began to feel heavy. Wake up, Mike. Fight through it. You can make it, I told myself. But I was wrong again. As each mile marker passed, my eyes became heavier and heavier. I felt myself start to doze off. I shook my head to snap myself out of it and reached for my coffee cup. In my sleepy state, I reached but couldn't feel the cup. I took my eyes off the road for just a second, seeing the cup and reaching for it. I turned my hazy eyes back to the road, and that was when I saw it, the black dog. As I rolled down Route 66, heading west to California, eyes heavy, barely able to stay awake, my headlights beaming out into the darkness that stood before me. It appeared out of nowhere. Its eyes were blood red, its teeth were sharp and shiny, its coat was as black as the devil's soul, and its face was so hideous that I can't even describe it. That image will forever be burned into my subconscious mind. My headlights shined upon it as it ran full speed down the center of the lane, directly toward the front of my truck. Holy shit! I screamed as I hit the brakes and whipped the cab hard to the right. My front passenger steer tire then went off the side of the road, falling a few inches onto the grass and heading straight for a ditch. My rear drive wheels were next to follow. In my panic state, I tried correcting the turn by whipping the cab hard to the left. I thought I was successful until momentum and inertia took over, causing the trailer to slam hard into the driver's side rear drive tires, causing the cab to slide diagonally down the road. I then felt the entire truck start to flip over on its side. I said a little prayer, put my hands over my eyes, and let whatever was going to happen happen. I screamed as the truck went over and slammed hard on the ground, flinging me around like a rag doll. Thank God, I was wearing my seatbelt. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I hadn't been wearing it. Always wear your seatbelt. Anyway, the truck then slid about 30 yards, but never went into the ditch. It almost did, but thankfully it did not. The sound of glass breaking, grinding metal filled the air, as well as thick gray smoke and the smell of oil and other fluids from the truck's engine. Luckily, the gas tank was not damaged in the crash. When it was over, I just laid there suspended almost upside down in the air, still in my seatbelt. Thankful to still be alive, I reached up, grabbed the most shit bar, and unlocked my seatbelt. My legs hit the gear shift as my body fell. I maneuvered my legs off of it, still holding onto the bar, and stood on top of the broken glass from the passenger side window, letting go of the bar. Now, what happened next completely terrified me. I was about to call dispatch when I heard it. Now, I've heard other truckers talk about seeing the black dog and the wreck that followed, but I never heard anything like what happened to me. Maybe they left this part out, I don't know, because this was totally fucked up. As I stood there, I began to hear a low growling sound that intensified with every passing second, until it was almost at a deafening tone. I then heard a loud thud, followed by scratching on the driver's side door, right above me. I'm glad I rolled the windows up when I left the truck stop, I thought, as that was the only window not cracked or broken. I saw bright red lights shoot across the window. At first, I thought they were lights, but they were not. What the fuck is that? I said, followed by another loud thud on the ground. Now, for some reason, I turned and looked out the windshield, which was severely cracked, and saw two bright red eyes staring directly at me. through the cracked windshield. This thing was mere inches away from me. Its face then came into focus. Its snout was pulsating as it opened its mouth, revealing row after row of immensely white teeth. No, not teeth. Fangs. It was drooling and foaming at the mouth. I screamed and jumped between the driver's seat and the passenger seat into the sleeper, which was totally destroyed by the way. My shoulder landing hard on the edge of the mini fridge, I thought I broke it. I screamed out in pain. I grabbed my shoulder and sat down on the top of my now broken microwave. I hunched over as far as I could and ducked my head down so I couldn't be seen. The dog then barked the most loudest and most demonic, evil bark that I've ever heard. Worse than those evil dogs in that 80s horror movie, Devil Dogs. Now, I'm not a very religious man. I mean, I believe in God, carry a Bible with me on long trips, and all that good stuff. But I don't go to church, and I've never even read the Bible. But at that moment in time, I wished I did. Anyway, I saw the Bible amidst all the rubble. I picked it up, held it close to my chest, and prayed, and prayed, and prayed for this thing to go away. It did not go away. Periodically, I would stick my head up above the side of the passenger seat and see it standing there, growling and barking, throughout the next 3.5 hours. Now, as I said before, I never told anyone this story, besides my therapist, and a guy named Rooster. You see, I had been having night terrors because of it. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night about 3 to 4 times a week. It traumatized me so much that I stopped driving at night in fear of seeing that dog. I knew I needed help, so I called a therapist. I told her this story and told her about my night terrors. She diagnosed me with PTSD and prescribed me Zoloft once a day. I take it at night since it makes me drowsy. Anyway, it helps a little bit. I don't wake up screaming half as much. She also suggested that instead of keeping the whole traumatic experience bottled up inside of me, that I should tell as many people as I possibly could what happened. So that's what I'm doing here. Anyway, back to the story. Like I was saying, the dog stood there for 3.5 hours. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something heavy hitting the glass. I stuck my head above the seat one last time to see the dog rush toward the glass, hitting its head hard against it, cracking it a little more. It stepped back, let out an ear-piercing growl, its eyes glowing brighter as it charged the glass once again, this time breaking through it. Pieces of glass shot everywhere. I screamed as I fell back to my sitting position, held the Bible close, and began reciting the Lord's Prayer. I was completely scared shitless. I then saw its head rise above the passenger seat and stare directly at me, eyes glowing, fangs showing, and mouth foaming. It snarled, drew back, and was just about to pounce on me when it let out this ear-piercing shriek of pain and began shaking violently. Thick gray smoke then began pouring out of its eye sockets, its ears, and its mouth. I screamed again. As I did, I saw that dog explode into a cloud of thick gray smoke and disappear into thin air. I cleared the smoke with my hand, coughed a little, only to realize that the sun was beginning to rise. Sunlight must kill this thing, I thought. I had never been so glad to see the sunrise in my life. The dog was gone. What the fuck? I said, completely exhausted. I took a deep breath as my fear began to subside. I sat the Bible on the microwave next to me and pulled out my cell phone. I then called dispatch. I gave them my location, told them I flipped my truck and how long I had been out there. I didn't tell them what really happened. Dispatch said they would send out a recovery rotator truck and a heavy-duty tow truck. I thanked them and ended the conversation, putting my phone back in my pocket. I then took a deep breath, slowly crept over the passenger seat, reached up and grabbed the CB. I pressed the button and said, "Breaker 1 to 9. This is Vanilla Mike. I am 10 to 34, in need of assistance. Anyone got their ears on out there, come back," hoping it still worked. Shortly after I put that out on the radio, I got a response. "Yeah, Vanilla Mike, this is Red Rooster. I hear you're 10 to 34. What's your 20? I then gave him my location. That's what 20 means in trucker lingo. Anyway, about 30 minutes went by when I heard the sound of air brakes. I stood up on the side of the seat and looked out the driver's side window to see a red 18-wheeler stopped on the shoulder of the road, right behind my truck. I then climbed out of the window, maneuvered over to the hood, slid down into the ground below, walked around the front of my truck, and began walking over to the red truck. A long, red-haired older gentleman climbed out of the cab, met me halfway, and shook my hand. We introduced ourselves to each other. He reminded me of Willie Nelson, wearing a cowboy hat and a pair of cowboy boots. Anyway, he looked at my truck, then asked what happened. I told him. He said, "Yup, I seen that black, some bitch back in 73, dead of night, came out of nowhere jackknifing my rig, almost lost my load in my life. Ugly little sucker. It woke me the hell up, though." "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little shaken up," I answered. My shoulder was killing me. Anyway, he then invited me to sit in his truck and said he would wait with me until the recovery truck arrived. We talked for about 2 hours about everything under the sun, drinking coffee, telling jokes, and laughing. He had his own coffee maker. Anyway, the recovery truck and the tow truck finally arrived. It was about 10:30 at that point. It took them 4.5 hours to get my truck upright. The cops had to shut down the westbound lane to do so, and they gave me a ticket for inattentive driving. I just paid it. The judge wouldn't have believed me anyway. Now, once my truck was back upright and I secured a ride home from the tow truck driver, I said goodbye to Rooster. He climbed in his truck, hit the horn a couple times, and just rolled on. He was a good man. I hope our paths cross again one day. Under better circumstances, of course. Anyway, I then took a look at the damage. It was massive. I was lucky to be alive. If I would have went left and fell on the driver's side, I would have surely died. That's it. I'm done. I told myself. Once was enough for me. I never stepped foot in a rig ever again. The owner of the trucking company was nice enough to have the truck towed back to the shop at his expense. I signed it over to him, and he put it, damaged and all, in the side yard of the shop with a sign across the windshield that reads, "Believe the myth." Now, even though I don't drive or ride in a truck anymore, I still work here. I am now in charge of dispatch. The old dispatcher took my job. Good luck to him. Anyway, it pays a lot less money, but I'm okay with that. I don't have to worry about seeing that dog anymore. Now, I assign drivers their loads, provide mapping information, ensure the product is loaded properly, as well as many other things. I rent a room at the Flop House down the street. The room is about as big as my sleeper cab was, maybe a little bigger. There's a bed, a dresser, a lamp, and a rolling clothes rack like you see in laundromats in the corner. I had to buy a new mini fridge, a new microwave, and a new coffee pot, as they were all damaged in the crash. I also bought a small flat-screen TV and a DVD player. The Flop House don't have cable. Anyway, there's a shared bathroom with 3 showers, side by side, at the end of the hall, and a couple coin-operated washers and dryers downstairs. It's really not that bad. I don't mess with lot lizards anymore. No, I got a real girlfriend named Natasha. I met her at Chelsea's restaurant. My shoulder is doing fine. It was just badly bruised. Now, in closing, I would just like to say to any of you truckers out there, if you feel your eyes getting heavy and it's hard to focus on the road, please, promise me that you'll stop. Pull over on the side of the road, stop at a gas station, stop somewhere because the black dog is no myth. It's no legend. No, that dog is real. I've seen it, and it's got one hell of a bite. Fourth story. I'm a truck driver, and my company has some strange rules. I've been working as a truck driver for well over 10 years now, but I only recently changed companies. I actually would have stayed in my own company, but when my friend Jake told me how much his company paid, I practically begged him to give me a job there. He referred me there, and I got the job after a quick interview. The interview itself was very strange because I was asked some questions I didn't expect, like, have you ever abandoned your vehicle on the road? Are you afraid of the dark? Are you religious, etc.? I answered everything truthfully and got hired right on the spot, so I didn't think twice about the oddity of the questions. My job was to transport dried meat products to a small town, and for some reason, the company said it could only be done at night, and that I had to be there by morning. I'm used to night shifts, and the handsome pay more than compensated for it, so I didn't complain. When the time came for my first tour, Jake explained which route I should take to get to my destination, stating the GPS was off a little. Before I entered the truck, he sent a message to my phone and told me to listen to it when I get on the road, since it explained some basic rules I should follow. I thanked him and started driving. When I got on the old road, which Jake told me to take, I opened the message he sent me and realized it was an audio recording from him. Here's what it said. Hey Paul, welcome to the company. Now I know you're an experienced truck driver, but our company has a list of rules you need to strictly follow while you're driving. I'm going to lay them out for you here, and you make sure to follow them as best you can. I'll also send you a text message so you can read the rules in case you aren't sure. Now, first of all, make sure to turn on your high beams and keep them on at all times, since it's really dark on the road. You may notice that even with the lights on, it's really dark, but don't let that concern you. Within the first 10 miles, you may see a dead-end sign ahead. Ignore it and just keep driving. If your lights start flickering by this point, speed up and drive as fast as you can until the flickering stops. You may see an old man hitchhiking by the road at this point. Make sure to stop your vehicle and ask him where he's going. If he says to the nearest town, let him in. If he says anything else, floor it and don't look back. If you do let him in, he will remain quiet for about an hour while you're driving, and then he'll ask you to stop and let him out, despite being in the middle of nowhere. Do what he says, but once he's out, don't look at him while he's walking into the night. You should be well within the 20th mile by now. If you start to hear any banging or growling noises coming from the back of the truck, ignore them. They'll go away faster if you maintain a consistent driving speed, so try to do that. Before you reach the 30th mile, make sure to turn off your radio if it was on until now. Turning it down will not work, so make sure to turn it off. This is really important. By the 35th mile, your radio will suddenly turn on and will be at highest volume. Now it's really important that you pay attention here. If a song plays, any song, simply turn it down or off. But if you only hear static, stop your truck right away, turn off the engine, lie down on the seat, and close your eyes. Try to be as still as possible and keep your eyes closed. You'll hear tapping on the windshield and roof, but you'll be okay as long as you keep your eyes closed. Even if you hear the truck door opening, don't move. Whatever opens them will close them in a few seconds after sniffing around. Once the noises around the truck stop, you can open your eyes slowly and look at your driver's window. If the window is fogged up, wait one more minute. Otherwise, you can sit back up and continue driving. By the 50th mile, you'll start to see something running along your truck on all fours on the side of the road. No matter how fast you go, it will always keep up with your truck, but it's advised you maintain a speed of at least 60 miles per hour. Try to keep your eyes on the road because there's a curve, after which the creature will be gone. If the creature is still following you after the curve, speed up and hope you lose it by the next curve. You only have 3 curves, so make them count. By the 70th mile, your truck will sputter to a halt. Remain as calm as you can and try restarting the engine as fast as you can. Don't look in the rearview mirror at the figures running towards your truck. Just start the engine, and as soon as you do, floor it. You'll notice by mile 80 that it's getting really hot inside the truck. Don't bother with the air condition because it won't work. Try taking off your jacket, but don't open the window under any circumstances. Try not to fall asleep either, because even though the road goes straight, you may find yourself swerving off a cliff if you close your eyes. If you need to use the bathroom, only do it between the 85th and 90th mile, and make sure to keep your high beams on while you're doing it. Do not step off the road or out of the light. When you're done taking a leak, you may see someone move behind your truck just as you turn around. Don't try following them, because you'll just endlessly move around the truck just in time for them to always get behind the next corner, and they want you to stay outside as long as possible. If you hear a high-pitched scream in the distance while you're taking a leak, run back to the truck and floor it. I don't care if you piss your pants, but do not waste a second running back. Regardless of the mileage, at around 3 a.m. your phone will start ringing. Don't answer it, no matter who it is, even me. The caller will try to get you to answer 3 times before sending you a message. Don't open the message, either. Again, whoever it's from, ignore it. By the 100th mile, you may see a pair of beams from other vehicles in the distance moving toward you. If you do, turn off your lights immediately and wait for the other truck to pass by. Once it does, you may turn your lights back on. Repeat for any other oncoming vehicles. Do not honk or do anything to attract their attention. Keep looking in the rearview mirror, and if you see the beams of the truck turning around and coming back towards you, drive away as fast as you can and pray you are faster. Now, when you reach the 120th mile, you'll see a sign for a 20 miles per hour speed limit. Slow down to 20 miles per hour and do not go over that speed, since the sound can attract unwanted attention. You can speed up once you see another sign that tells you the speed limit stops at that point. At around mile 130, you may see a woman waving and asking for your help. Do not slow down and try not to even look at her. Once she's behind you, look in the rearview mirror. If she's still on the road, you're safe. If she's gone, just look straight and don't even think about looking at the passenger's seat, no matter what you see with your peripheral vision. Once you reach 140th mile, you're safe. From here, it's a straight shot to your destination. Don't try to turn your truck around at any point while you're on the road, because you'll end up driving until you're out of gas, and if that happens, you're as good as dead. Don't use your GPS until you reach the town either, because it will take you to an old dirt road, which will have you driving in a loop. Once you reach the client's place, the employees will take care of the rest. 5th story. Truck driver encounters unexplainable horror on remote night road. It was a night like any other on the desolate highways that crisscross through the heart of nowhere. My name's Jake, and I'm a truck driver, been hauling cargo through the lonesome roads for over a decade. The kind of life that keeps you company with the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of asphalt. That night, I found myself on a particularly eerie stretch of road, swallowed by an impenetrable fog. The kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud, concealing the world beyond. The only companions were the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the mist and the rhythmic beat of raindrops on the roof of my rig. I'd heard rumors on the CB radio about this stretch, a place where truckers whispered of abandoned cars, tales of drivers gone missing without a trace. It was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned drivers, but I'd always scoffed at such stories. That is until that night. As I maneuvered through the winding road, the fog became denser, almost palpable. Visibility dropped to a few feet ahead, and the low hum of the engine seemed swallowed by an oppressive silence. The glow of my headlights refracted off the mist, casting eerie shadows that danced like wraiths in the night. It was then that I saw him, a silhouette on the side of the road. A man, or so it seemed, standing motionless in the fog. My instincts told me to keep going, but the human in me wanted to lend a helping hand. I eased off the gas, and the truck rolled to a stop beside him. He was oddly pale, and the fog clung to his form like a ghostly cloak. But what sent a shiver down my spine were his eyes, big, round, and as black as the void itself. His mouth, a gaping maw, stretched wide in a manner that defied the laws of anatomy. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was terribly wrong. The man-creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just stood there staring into the fog. With a lump in my throat, I decided to get going. But as I revved up the engine, I glanced back at him. That's when I saw it, the twisted, grotesque smile that curled on his featureless face. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, leaving the fog-draped figure behind. As I drove away, I grabbed the radio mic to share my unsettling encounter with fellow truckers. But to my dismay, the once buzzing airwaves were silent. No static, no voices, just an unsettling void that mirrored the fog outside. The road seemed endless, and I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring in protest. I needed distance from that creature, needed the safety of the city lights. But as the miles blurred together, the fog persisted, unyielding. I drove way over 100 miles and was sure that creature was far away and I will never met it again. In the distance, a lonely parking lot emerged, and I decided it was time to pull over. The weariness and fear clawed at me, and I desperately needed a moment to collect myself. I shut off the engine, closed the curtains, and tried to shake off the encounter as mere imagination. Little did I know that the night had only just begun, and the horrors lurking in the fog were far from done with me. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and nestled into my bunk, hoping that the haunting image of that pale figure with the unnaturally large eyes and twisted smile would fade away with the night. But sleep remained elusive. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, a sense of impending doom washed over me, jolting me awake. A shiver ran down my spine as I fumbled to open the curtains. The parking lot was bathed in an eerie glow from the flickering overhead lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the fog. That's when I saw them again, 3 of those nightmarish creatures. They stood like sentinels, their dark eyes fixed on the truck. Panic gripped me as I fumbled to turn on the cabin lights, revealing their ghastly features in all their horrifying glory. Their mouths, wide open, emitted guttural growls that reverberated through the metal walls of the truck. The air in the cabin grew thick with an otherworldly presence, a malevolence that seeped through every pore of my being. I reached for the ignition, praying that the truck would roar to life and carry me far away from this nightmare. But nothing happened. The engine remained silent, as if in protest against the encroaching terror. The creatures, sensing my vulnerability, began to advance. Their movements were unsettlingly smooth, almost as if they were gliding across the asphalt. The growls intensified, echoing through the desolate parking lot. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as desperation set in. My hands trembled as I repeatedly turned the key, willing the engine to respond. The growls escalated into a cacophony, and the creatures closed in, their features contorted in a grotesque display of hunger. Just as the creatures were about to reach the truck, a surge of relief washed over me as the engine roared to life. I slammed the gear into drive, the truck jolting forward, leaving the creatures behind in the rearview mirror. As the truck sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were not bound by the laws of the physical world. Their terrifying growls echoed in the distance, even as the city lights finally emerged on the horizon. I dared to glance back, and to my horror, I saw the creatures running after the truck with unnatural speed, far beyond anything human. It was as if the shadows themselves were chasing me. As I drove into the welcoming glow of city lights, the creatures abruptly halted. Their twisted forms lingered at the edge of the urban sprawl, their growls fading into the night. Relief mingled with a lingering dread as I realized they had a boundary, a limit to their reach. I parked the truck in a well-lit area, surrounded by the comforting hum of civilization. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio mic once more, hoping to connect with anyone, but the static-filled airwaves remained stubbornly silent. The city lights seemed to push back the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were still out there, waiting in the shadows for their next opportunity to strike. The night was far from over, and the road ahead held more horrors than I could fathom. I spent the restless hours of the night parked in that well-lit haven, the city lights warding off the encroaching darkness. But no matter how brightly the urban landscape glowed, the images of those nightmarish creatures lingered in the recesses of my mind, their growls echoing like a sinister melody. As dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of fog, with a newfound paranoia. The city lights gradually faded in the rearview mirror as the road stretched into another desolate expanse. My radio crackled to life, the sudden sound making me jump. It was a voice of fellow trucker. "Hey, you there? You okay?" The voice sounded concerned, and I eagerly responded, recounting the horrors of the night, the fog-shrouded figures, the broken radio, and the unrelenting pursuit. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke, heavy with a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're not alone. We've all heard those stories, the abandoned cars, the creatures in the fog. But we always thought they were just stories." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had faced those monstrous entities. The radio buzzed with hushed conversations among truckers, each sharing their own encounters with the supernatural on this stretch of road. The stories varied, but a common thread emerged. Those creatures, with their haunting eyes and twisted smiles, were a malevolent force that seemed drawn to the lonely roads in the dead of night. No one knew their origin or their purpose, but they left a trail of fear in their wake. As I continued my journey, the unease persisted. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the fog clung to the edges of the highway like a malevolent specter. I couldn't shake the feeling that those creatures were watching, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The radio chatter intensified, with truckers exchanging advice on how to avoid the creatures, sharing tales of those who had disappeared without a trace. The fear was palpable, a shared experience that bound us together in the face of the unknown. With each passing mile, the city lights became a distant memory. The road ahead was swallowed by an impenetrable fog, and the radio once again fell silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. As I approached the familiar stretch where I first encountered the creatures, a sense of dread settled over me. The fog thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Then, a haunting realization struck me. This road was a loop, an unending circuit that brought travelers back to the heart of the supernatural. The city lights, the camaraderie on the radio, all illusions meant to deceive. The creatures weren't bound by distance. They were bound by time, forever haunting those who dared traverse this cursed stretch. A guttural growl echoed through the fog, and the twisted figures emerged once again. Their black eyes bore into my soul, their gaping mouths emitting an otherworldly wail. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest, but the truck seemed tethered to the nightmarish loop. As the creatures closed in, the fog swallowed everything, and the road became an unending void. The last thing I saw were those eyes, an abyss that seemed to consume all light. The radio crackled to life one final time, a chorus of terrified voices screaming a warning. But it was too late. The creatures closed in, and the world descended into darkness. And so, the haunted highway claimed another victim, lost to the eternal night and the malevolent creatures that lurked within the fog. The loop continued, a never-ending cycle of horror, trapping the unwary in an unending nightmare. The road stretched on, shrouded in fog, a haunted path that few dared to traverse, and even fewer escaped. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.